hold your answer. You had a feeling, a preference. The expert, because expertise should mean something. Or the formula, because numbers do not lie. Either way, the preference arrived before the argument. It always does. A lieutenant and his crew arrive at a routine kitchen fire. They enter the living room. They set up. They begin spraying water. The fire does not respond. The water hits the flames, and the flames continue as if the water is irrelevant. The lieutenant feels something he cannot name, a wordless discomfort. Something is wrong. He orders everyone out. Now. No explanation. They clear the living room. Seconds later, the floor collapses. The fire was not in the kitchen. It was in the basement. They had been standing on it. When the psychologist Kahneman-Klein interviewed the lieutenant afterward, the lieutenant said it was extrasensory perception. He believed he had a sixth sense. Klein did not. Klein believed something more interesting. The lieutenant had been fighting fires for more than a decade. In that time, he had seen thousands of configurations, heat patterns, smoke behavior, the way flame moves through a structure. His gut feeling was not magic. It was a pattern his body recognized before his conscious mind could articulate it. The fire was too hot for a kitchen fire. The room was too quiet. The water was not working. These cues were available. He did not process them as data points. He processed them as a feeling. The feeling was correct, but the question this episode asks is not whether it was correct. The question is, when is it correct? And when is the same feeling, the same certainty, the same wordless authority, wrong? 15 years of experience. But not in this specific case. She did not meet the conditions for valid intuition. The environment was not regular enough. The feedback was not fast enough. Her confidence was real. Her expertise was not. Herbert Simon spent decades studying expertise. His definition of intuition was precise. The situation has provided a cue. This cue has given the expert access to information stored in memory, and the information provides the answer. Intuition is nothing more and nothing less than recognition. A chess master has spent at least 10,000 hours in dedicated practice, roughly 6 years at 5 hours a day. In that time, the player becomes familiar with thousands of configurations. Learning chess, Simon argued, is like learning to read. The patterns of pieces on a board are like letters. A full position is like a long word or a sentence. The meaning arrives whole. Show a chess master a position from an actual game for 5 seconds. Remove it. Ask them to reconstruct it. They can place every piece. Show a novice the same position for the same 5 seconds. They place 4 or 5. The master is not remembering harder. The master is recognizing a pattern they have seen before. Kahneman-Klein studied how fireground commanders made decisions under pressure. His initial hypothesis was that they would generate several options and compare them. He was wrong. The commanders generated a single option from a repertoire of patterns compiled during more than a decade of experience. Then they mentally simulated it. If the simulation revealed a problem, they modified the option or moved to the next one. But the first option was almost always the one they used. Klein called this the recognition-primed decision model. It was recognition, the same process Simon described in chess, but operating in smoke and noise and collapsing structures. The entire process felt, to the commander, like intuition, like knowing without thinking. And in these commanders, the intuition worked, because the environment met the conditions. Twas Brelig and the slithy toves did jeer and gimble in the Waby. You pronounce those words correctly. They do not exist. But your reading system, trained over millions of words, recognized the patterns. Your mouth knew what to do with slithy before your mind could explain why. This is what 10,000 hours produces. Not a library of facts, a library of patterns. And the retrieval feels not like retrieval, but like knowing. The fire lieutenant felt the basement fire in his gut. The chess master sees the winning move without calculation. The skilled reader pronounces nonsense with perfect cadence. In every case, the mechanism is the same: recognition. A feeling that seems to come from nowhere. The question is not whether the feeling is real. The feeling is always real. The question is whether the recognition is valid. These are the two conditions for valid intuition. Both must be met. If either is absent, the intuition is an illusion, feels identical to the real thing. The first condition: a regular environment. Chess is regular. The rules do not change. Fire behavior is regular, not perfectly, but sufficiently. These environments have stable regularities that can be learned. Stock markets are not regular. Long-term political forecasting is not regular. In these environments, the expert develops patterns, but the patterns connect to noise. The learning is real. The lessons are false. Philip Tetlock spent decades measuring political judgment. The experts, with one big theory, the hedgehogs, made confident forecasts and did badly. The better forecasters were foxes, cautious, numeric, willing to update. The later superforecasters were not pure gut experts. They treated predictions as bets, tracked their errors, and revised when evidence arrived. They built a feedback system around an environment that gives almost none. The second condition: adequate, timely feedback. An anesthesiologist gets clear, fast feedback. If something goes wrong during surgery, the patient's vital signs change within seconds. A radiologist does not. The X-ray is read, the diagnosis is sent, but if a tumor is missed, the radiologist may never learn about it. The patient goes elsewhere. The error is invisible. The radiologist has experience, but the experience is mute. Psychotherapists fall in between. They develop genuine skill at reading patients' immediate emotional states, but they get sparse or no feedback on whether their long-term treatment predictions were right. They cannot distinguish their valid short-term intuitions from their invalid long-term forecasts. If an anesthesiologist says, "I have a feeling something is wrong," everyone in the operating room should be prepared for an emergency. If a stock picker says, "I have a feeling about this company," the feeling is worth nothing. Not because the stock picker is less intelligent, because the stock picker's environment does not hold still long enough to be learned. In the early 20th century, a physician developed an extraordinary reputation for diagnosing typhoid fever. He could examine a patient and know, with what seemed like clinical infallibility, whether the disease was present. His colleagues marveled. His patients trusted him. His track record was remarkable. His diagnostic method involved palpating the patient's tongue. He did not wash his hands between examinations. Patient after patient whom he examined subsequently developed typhoid. His predictions were accurate, but not because he was exercising professional intuition. He was spreading the disease. He palpated the tongue of a healthy patient, transferred the bacterium, and the patient fell ill, confirming his diagnosis. His confidence grew. His intuition became legendary. Robin Hogarth called this a wicked environment. Not wicked in the moral sense, wicked in the structural sense. An environment that provides feedback, but feedback that is systematically misleading. His environment did not teach him to recognize typhoid. It taught him to cause it and then recognize the consequences. From the inside, there was no difference between his expertise and the real thing. He had pattern recognition. He had confidence. He had a track record. The only thing he did not have was validity. In 1954, the psychologist Paul Meehl published a slim, devastating book. He reviewed 20 studies that compared to methods of prediction. The first method was clinical, trained professionals, interviewing subjects, reading files, forming impressions, and making predictions based on their experience and judgment. The second method was statistical. Simple formulas that combined a few variables with fixed weights and produced a number. The formulas won, not in specialized domains, Across the board, trained counselors predicted freshman grades after 45-minute interviews, with access to high school grades, aptitude tests, and 4-page personal statements. A formula using only grades and 1 test score beat 11 of the 14 counselors. Meehl continued collecting evidence for the rest of his career. The cumulative record reached roughly 200 studies. Approximately 60% showed the algorithm significantly more accurate than the clinician. The rest were ties. A tie, Meehl noted, is tantamount to a win for the statistical method, since formulas are vastly cheaper than professionals. No convincing exception was ever documented. Not one. The reaction from clinicians was not curiosity, it was hostility. They described the clinical method as rich, deep, genuine, living, true to life. They described the statistical method as mechanical, dead, rigid, sterile, blind. The adjectives are the argument, not an argument about accuracy. An argument about identity. Meehl's ethical argument was blunt. It is unethical to rely on intuitive judgment when a formula is available that will make fewer mistakes. The story of a child who died because an algorithm made an error is more poignant than the story of the same child dying because of human error. But the algorithm kills fewer children. A study presented the same chest X-rays to experienced radiologists on 2 separate occasions, weeks apart. They contradicted their own previous readings 20% of the time. Not disagreement between different radiologists. Self-contradiction. 101 auditors showed the same pattern. A 41-study meta-review confirmed it is typical. The explanation is not incompetence. It is noise. Whether you read the X-ray before lunch or after, whether the previous case was alarming or routine, whether you slept well, the human judge is a measurement instrument, and the instrument drifts. A formula does not drift. This is not a virtue of intelligence. It is a virtue of consistency. Return to the question you were asked at the start. An economist named Orley Ashenfelter built a formula to predict the future price of Bordeaux wines. 3 weather measurements. Average summer temperature, rain at harvest, total rainfall the previous winter. No tasting, no swirling, no vocabulary of terroir and tannin. The correlation with actual prices was above 0.90. A prominent French wine critic said it was like judging movies without actually seeing them. The response, another observed, was somewhere between violent and hysterical. The critics were not defending their predictions. They were defending their identity as people who could taste what a formula could not. Formula did not merely outperform them. It humiliated them by suggesting that a thermometer and a rain gauge knew more than a lifetime of palate training. If you chose the expert at the start of this episode, you were not wrong to value expertise. You were wrong about what expertise is. Experience without a valid environment and timely feedback produces only confidence. And confidence without validity is the most dangerous kind of knowledge, because it feels exactly like the real thing. Robin Dawes proposed a formula for marital stability. Frequency of lovemaking minus frequency of quarrels. You do not want your result to be a negative number. The formula is a joke. It is also more accurate than most marriage counselors. Daniel Kahneman believed that expert intuition was, in most cases, an illusion. Gary Klein believed it was, in most cases, genuine. They had spent decades on opposite sides of the same question. They disagreed about nearly everything. Then they decided to write a paper together. It took 7 to 8 years, hundreds of emails, many drafts. It almost blew up more than once. They called it an adversarial collaboration, a term Kahneman had coined for the process of 2 intellectual opponents attempting to identify precisely where they agreed and where they did not. The results surprised them both. They published a joint paper with a title that confessed the outcome: Conditions for Intuitive Expertise, a Failure to Disagree. not on the principles. They agreed on the two conditions. They agreed that intuition is genuine in regular environments, with timely feedback, and an illusion everywhere else. What they could not agree on was the emotional attitude. Klein still winces when the word bias is mentioned. Kahneman finds more pleasure than Klein does in the comeuppance of arrogant experts who do not know the limits of their competence. They agreed on the science. They disagreed on the mood. In 1955, Daniel Kahneman was a 21-year-old lieutenant in the Israeli Defense Forces. His bachelor's degree, he later noted, probably qualified him as the best-trained psychologist in the Army. He was assigned to evaluate whether the interview system used to screen recruits was working. It was not. The existing interviews lasted 15 to 20 minutes. They produced global impressions, gut feelings about the recruit's potential. The interviewers were confident. The predictions were almost useless. Kahneman redesigned the system. He selected 6 personality traits: responsibility, masculine pride, and 3 others. For each trait, he wrote standardized questions with specific, factual answers. The interviewers would score each trait on a 1 to 5 scale, based on the answers, not on their impression. The interviewers nearly mutinied. "You are turning us into robots." They protested that the new method stripped them of their professional skill, that it reduced the richness of human interaction to a checklist, that a person cannot be captured in 6 numbers. Kahneman listened. Then he offered a compromise. After completing the 6 standardized ratings, the interviewers would close their eyes, try to imagine the recruit as a soldier, and assign a final overall score based on their gut feeling. The results arrived. The structured interview was far more accurate than the old method, but the surprise was the close your eyes score. It performed just as well as the sum of the 6 traits. Not because the gut was magic, because the gut, disciplined by the structured interview, forced to attend to specific facts before being allowed to integrate, produced better intuitions than the gut left to its own devices. Kahneman's final formula gave equal weight to both, the 6 trait sum and the closer eyes score. 45 years later, after receiving the Nobel Prize, Kahneman visited the same base. The system was still in use. The commanding officer walked him through the procedure, step by step. When she reached the final instruction, she smiled. "And then we tell them, close your eyes." In 1953, a medical resident asked Virginia Apgar a question over breakfast. "How would you make a systematic assessment of a newborn?" Her answer was immediate. "That's easy. You would do it like this." She grabbed a piece of paper. She wrote down 5 variables: heart rate, respiration, reflex irritability, muscle tone, and color. Each scored 0 to 2. A total of 8 or above meant the baby was in good shape. 4 or below meant immediate intervention was required. It took her less than a minute to design. It is still used in every delivery room in the world. The Apgar score replaces the global impression with a checklist. It does not require genius. It requires attention to 5 specific things, scored the same way regardless of who is scoring. Dawes's insight: an equal weight formula performs as well as one with statistically optimal weights. The Apgar score does not need to be tuned. It needs to be followed. When should you override the formula? Almost never. The broken leg rule: you override the algorithm only when you possess specific, decisive, rare information categorically outside its inputs. A broken leg, a death in the family. Broken legs are very rare, as well as decisive. The problem is that experts believe they encounter broken legs constantly. Every case feels special. Every stock feels like the exception. And accuracy drops. The rule is not, trust the expert when the expert feels confident. The rule is, evaluate the provenance. Was the environment regular? Was the feedback timely? If yes, the intuition is likely valid. If no, the intuition is noise that feels like signal. Do not trust anyone, including yourself, to tell you how much you should trust their judgment. Okay? The experts who are wrong are not less confident than the experts who are right. They are often more confident. They do not know the limits of their expertise, and the unrecognized limits help explain why they are so sure. Warren Harding was elected President of the United States in 1920. He was tall, square-jawed, and handsome, the perfect image of a strong and decisive leader. The American public looked at him and saw a precedent. They answered the wrong question. Not will he be a good leader, but does he look like one? The substitution was invisible. The feeling of confidence was genuine. He is consistently ranked among the worst presidents in American history. Now consider the Kouros, the ancient Greek sculpture that arrived at the Getty Museum. Art experts examined it and felt, in their gut, that something was wrong. They could not articulate why. One expert felt a wave of intuitive repulsion. Another simply knew it was not right. They turned out to be correct. The sculpture was a forgery. Both feelings, the feeling about Harding, the feeling about the Kouros, arrived the same way, as a gut response, as a wordless conviction, as expertise expressing itself without explanation. One was valid, one was not, and from the inside, they were identical. Return to the hospital. She has 15 years of experience. She has treated hundreds of patients. She has a feeling about this one, a conviction that arrives without deliberation, a certainty that feels earned. Her gut says she knows. But her environment was not regular enough. The patterns she learned were not stable. They shifted with each protocol change, each new drug, each population variation. And her feedback was not fast enough. The outcomes arrived weeks or months later, filtered through other departments, other doctors, other records. She learned, but what she learned may not have been the right lessons. Her confidence is indistinguishable from the fire lieutenants. Her feeling is the same as the chess masters. Her certainty sounds exactly like the anesthesiologists. But the conditions were not met. The environment was not regular. The feedback was not timely. And she cannot tell the difference, because from the inside, there is no difference to tell. Valid intuition and invalid intuition feel the same. She felt one. The environment did not confirm which. She decided anyway. But there was a patient who lived through it, and a patient who died. Which one does she remember? There was a patient who lived through it, and a patient who died. Which one does she remember?